Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. We start our news bulletin from China, where the death toll from the new coronavirus has now jumped to 305. The Philippines has confirmed the first fatality by the disease outside of China. This report has the details.
After travel curbs and evacuations, China is now facing trade suspensions as the country fights to contain the coronavirus outbreak. Russia has suspended visa-free travel to and from China, while suspending import of mobile phones from the country. In an alarming development, the Philippines announced a fatality from the disease, the first death reported from outside China.
DOH also confirmed that the 44-year-old male died yesterday, February 1, 2020. Over the course of the patient's admission, he developed severe pneumonia. In his last few days, the patient was stable and showed signs of improvement. However, the condition of the patient deteriorated within the last 24 hours, resulting in his demise.
With over 14,000 infected in China and more than 100 infected in at least 25 other countries, the outbreak has caused mass global hysteria. Thousands of Chinese medics are battling the disease in the virus's epicenter, Hubei province. Mayor of province's Hungang City, Qiu Lingjin, is utilizing all resources to stem the spread.
The city's financial department has released 416.39 million yuan of funds for the purchase of medical equipment and medicine. We have cleared way for these supplies to reach places where they're needed fast, and we're making sure the distribution follows proper procedures and that they're acquired and distributed on the same day with a clear record.
The UN's health body has advised against travel restrictions, saying they will hinder information sharing and medical supply chains. Beijing too has criticized travel restrictions, accusing foreign governments of ignoring official advice.
Meanwhile, China has reported an outbreak of the H5N1 bird flu in Hunan province, bordering the coronavirus epicenter Hubei. 4,500 chickens have died because of the epidemic so far, while authorities have culled nearly 18,000 poultry after the outbreak. The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs says the outbreak occurred in a farm in the Shuangqing district of Shaoyang City. Bird flu causes severe respiratory disease in birds and can also infect humans. According to the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, bird flu is deadlier than coronavirus with a mortality rate of over 50%. According to UN report, the 2013 bird flu outbreak in China caused $6.5 billion in economic losses. Moving on, Indian forces have murdered 21 civilians in occupied Kashmir in the month of January alone. The valley is reeling under Delhi's curfew and communications blackout for the past 182 days. Local media reported Indian troops have arrested over 100 activists, students and youth over the past month. 14 people have been critically injured due to pellets, bullets and tear gas shells fired by Indian troops during a peaceful protest against Delhi's annexation. Occupying troops also subjected 3 women to sexual abuse and ransacked and damaged 5 houses last month. In India, countrywide protests against the Citizenship Act have swelled as rallies and sit-ins continue for over a month. An all-women protest and conference will be held in Hyderabad and Telangana against the act today. The demonstration is being held to tell the government women will continue in their role at the forefront of India's resistance. Meanwhile, Aligarh authorities have stopped activists from holding an anti-Citizenship Act protest. Talking to media, protesters said they were exercising their democratic right to protest but were obstructed by the police. In a related development, Amnesty International says the new controversial Citizenship Act clearly violates the Constitution of India. The rights body's Asia-Pacific Advocacy Manager, Francisco Benscomi, made the remarks during testimony to U.S. lawmakers. During the testimony, Benscomi said the act is against international law and legitimizes discrimination on the basis of religion. Meanwhile, in another report, Amnesty said India is becoming a dangerous place for peaceful protests. It said a hateful, divisive and dehumanizing rhetoric has been unleashed on the protesters by the Indian government. It said Delhi has shown its disdain towards the right to freedom of expression by carrying out sweeping arrests under repressive and colonial laws. Prime Minister Imran Khan says Pakistan has played an important role in reducing tensions in the Middle East. In an interview, Khan discussed the Middle East, the Kashmir issue, and India's controversial Citizenship Act. Khan said continued efforts for sustainable peace are needed in the region.
There has to be some more of a permanent solution. At the moment, things are still tense, but for a time I feel that we have averted war. There was a time when it seemed that there could be actually a conflict. But at the moment, it looks as if things are cooling down.
PM Khan added India's takeover by radical Hindutva ideology has led to the current situation in occupied Kashmir. He said New Delhi has locked the valley down for the last 6 months by deploying 900,000 troops. Now moving on, the US says it will continue its efforts for a ceasefire and stability in Afghanistan. In a meeting with President Ashraf Ghani in Kabul, Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad discussed the latest developments in the Afghan peace process. The Afghan President's office said the US envoy briefed Ghani about his recent discussions with the Taliban and Pakistan's leadership. Khalilzad also met Afghanistan's Chief Executive Abdullah to discuss peace efforts. In a fresh round of talks in Doha, the Taliban and the US are trying to reach an agreement to end the Afghanistan war. In Russia, a Kremlin spokesman says US President Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan violates United Nations resolutions. Dmitry Peskov said Palestine and several Arab states have rejected the plan, putting a question mark on its feasibility. Earlier, Palestinian Authority cut all ties with the US and Israel, including those relating to security. The UN has also rejected the plan and said it is committed to pre-1967 borders between Israel and Palestine. Protests have resurfaced across Iraq against Mohammad Alawi's appointment as the new Prime Minister. Alawi was the communications minister in former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's cabinet. Hundreds of demonstrators took to the streets saying Alawi isn't a politically independent choice. Amid heightened tensions over the JCPOA, top EU diplomat Joseph Borrell is expected in Tehran tomorrow. This will be Borrell's first visit to Iran since taking office in early December. In a statement, Iran's Foreign Office said Borrell will meet Foreign Minister Javad Zarif and other senior Iranian officials. Spokesperson Abbas Mousavi gave no details on the EU Foreign Affairs chief's arrival or how long he will remain in the country. On 24th of January, Borrell called for a meeting of remaining states party to the 2015 nuclear deal in February. The visit comes after a bill on Iran quitting the Non-Proliferation Treaty was submitted to the Parliament's National Security Commission. Iran has kicked off 10 days of celebrations to mark the 41st anniversary of 1979 Islamic Revolution. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei visited the mausoleum of Imam Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic. Khamenei paid tribute to Iranian martyrs who lost their lives since the Islamic Revolution. Nationwide ceremonies kicked off at night yesterday, marking the exact time when Khomeini landed in Tehran after 15 years in exile. Khomeini's return to the country ultimately resulted in the overthrow of the monarch Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. U.S. Secretary of State Mike POMPEO is in Kazakhstan to hold talks on bilateral and regional cooperation. He met Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev and Foreign Minister Mokhtar Tulumberdzi in the capital city of Nur-Sultan. POMPEO is on a tour of Central Asia as Washington competes with Moscow for influence in the region. Ahead of the visit, POMPEO said Washington has an important opportunity to help Central Asian countries become independent. He said there is a lot of Chinese and Russian activity in the region. POMPEO will fly to Uzbekistan after meeting the Kazakh leadership. Russia has retained military bases, security and trade blocs in the Central Asian countries after they broke from the Soviet Union in 1991. Bolivia's interim government has granted a safe conduct to two of exiled ex-president Evo Morales' ex-ministers. Former Minister of Mining Cesar Navarro and former Deputy Minister of Agriculture Pedro Damian Dorado were allowed to travel to Mexico to receive asylum. The former ministers had been residing in the Mexican embassy in La Paz, along with another 7 members of Morales' administration. The government said the detention of former officials was a mistake.
Unfortunately, there was a lack of coordination between the public ministry and the national police, and this morning, 3 days after the safe conduct was granted, the police waited for him at the airport and apprehended them.
The diplomatic dispute between Mexico and Bolivia has been brewing since Mexico granted asylum to 9 of ex-President Morales' allies. Now moving on, in Libya, Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar has confirmed participation in the upcoming 5+5 military commission talks in Geneva. This comes after the UN envoy in Libya, Ghassan Salameh, met Haftar in eastern Rajma city. The UN-initiated committee will comprise 5 representatives of the Government of National Accord and 5 of the LNA. Its formation was announced at the Berlin Conference on Libya on 19th of January. The United Nations says the purpose of the military committee is to negotiate a full ceasefire in the country. The meeting in Geneva was earlier scheduled for 28th of January. The UN says a new date will be provided soon. France says it will deploy 600 more soldiers in the fight against militants in Africa's Sahel, south of the Sahara. In a statement, Defense Minister Florence Parly said the reinforcements will be sent to the area between Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. She said another part of the reinforcements will join the G5 Sahel forces. France has about 4,500 troops already operating in the region, bringing the total to 5,100. These soldiers are supporting poorly equipped, impoverished local armies that in 2017 launched a joint anti-jihadist G5 Sahel force. Welcome back. 20 people have been killed in a stampede during Sunday church service at a stadium in northern Tanzania. Government officials say hundreds crushed each other in a rush to get anointed in Moshi town. They said 5 among the dead were children, while 16 others were injured in the incident. Authorities fear the death toll could rise because of the size of the crowd. In Canada, 3 people have been killed and 2 others wounded in a shooting in an apartment in Toronto. Police said a 5th person was stabbed, but the victim's life was not in danger. Police hasn't given any information on the victims' identities or a possible motive so far, but they said the incident took place in an Airbnb rental in Toronto. Officials said the dead were young men aged 22, 20 and 19. Australian Capital Territory, Canberra, has lifted the state of emergency. Threats of massive bushfires receded after burning 55,000 hectares of land. However, rural and remote areas will continue to remain on a state of alert. Earlier, the threat level was downgraded to advice level before being upgraded to watch and act. Act Emergency Services Commissioner Georgina Wellen said there was no significant growth of the fire. Wellen said the fire continues to burn slowly downhill away from the capital, but Wellen warned the storms from the northwest could pose a new threat by whipping up the fires. The U.S. officially enters election season with the February 3 Iowa caucuses, where the selection for party nominees will begin. Americans are sharply divided on political solutions, but broadly agree on at least one point: the country is changing. This report has more.
Ladies and gentlemen, is everything okay in Iowa? Oh.
The U.S. presidential campaign is officially starting with the Iowa caucuses. The first stop is Clairton, in an industrial region of western Pennsylvania. The state was once reliably Democratic.
A lot of my members feel that they were, their opinions on it were ignored, that they, that the union should have endorsed Trump. Now, around the country, I don't know if that's changed or not, but I know my membership, they're still pretty, the majority of them are still behind Trump.
In a few months, Pennsylvania and other swing states will decide whether Donald Trump gets to stay in the White House. As he campaigns for re-election, the US president is taking credit for the hot economy. But here in the Rust Belt, manufacturing jobs continue to disappear.
When I first got out of high school, you could have got the day you walked out that door, you could have got a job, good paying, good health benefits, good pension, anywhere on a railroad, trucking, steel mills, the mines, anywhere.
Drive about 160 miles to the north and you'll reach Ashtabula on the shore of Lake Erie in Ohio. Just like Pennsylvania, Ohio chose Donald Trump in 2016 after going to Barack Obama twice. The journey ends in Iowa. The population in this rural state is 90% white, and some Democrats say it doesn't reflect the diversity of their party. Polls predict a tight race among Democratic contenders in Iowa. After that, the campaign heads to the state of New Hampshire.
After Brexit, 15 EU member states have urged the bloc's leaders to maintain their aid money in the next long-term budget. The member countries raised the issue at the Friends of Cohesion summit in the Portuguese city of Bahia. The European Commission has proposed slashing cohesion funds by around 22 billion euros for the 2021-2027 period. In a joint declaration, leaders of the affected nations said any cuts in investment capacity will be unacceptable. Britain accounted for around 15% of EU's economy and was the bloc's biggest military spender. But in the event of Brexit, Germany proposed reducing the size of the cohesion funds and attached conditions on spending. Turkey has announced it will seek new trade channels with the UK. Turkey's trade ministry said Ankara will be open to talks for a bilateral free trade deal through existing structures. Meanwhile, the EU has assured a non-hostile transition for the kingdom after the exit from the single market. In an open letter, French President Emmanuel Macron emphasized on Britain's unrivaled ties with France. Brussels Brexit coordinator Guy Van Verhofstadt said EU will work to ensure it is a project the UK would want to be a part of again. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.